land that resounded with jubilation 30 years ago after liberation from Japanese rule, a land plunged into darkness 5 years later in 1950 when North Korean Communist forces launched a devastating invasion. Under the United Nations flag, warriors from 16 allied countries fought here to help South Koreans regain their freedom. And today, many of these veterans are visiting Korea again, as much as a quarter century after their service here. They are returning to Korea upon invitation from the Korean government, this time via civilian airliner. They are now middle-aged veterans, revisiting the country where they once fought. Some are crippled, some lost their eyesight. They were all young and stalwart during the war in the 50s. Among the visiting veterans was retired Brigadier General Charles B. Smith, who commanded the famous Task Force Smith at the beginning of the war. All of them seemed to be moved by the reunion with Korean comrades in arms who greeted them at the airport. Driving into Seoul, the capital city, they saw an up-to-date metropolis completely rebuilt from total devastation. They drove to the National Cemetery. Thinking of the old days, they paid homage to friends who sacrificed their lives for the cause of justice and peace. Then they paid respects at the tomb of the deceased Madam Yuk Young-soo, wife of President Park Chung-hee of Korea. On the banks of the Imjin River northwest of Seoul stands a monument commemorating the United States' participation in the Korean War. The Korean people built this monument, recalling all those heroic battles that the American soldiers fought during the war. Standing before the monument, they placed bouquets of flowers honoring all those fallen comrades who fought at the Korean front in the 1950s. The Imjin River flows in silence, still dividing the country into south and north. At the sites of hard-fought battles, birds are the only signs of life. And yet nearby there runs a new highway, symbol of change. Veterans from the U.S. visited a familiar battle site, Chukmi-ryong Hill at Osan in Gyeonggi Province. General Charles Smith, commander of the 1st U.S. contingent sent in to stem the invading North Korean aggressors, revisited the site to pay tribute to all those who sacrificed their lives here. He said that the heartfelt welcome the people of Korea extended to him was, in fact, not solely for himself, but for every man in the old task force. On a hill at Song, Kangwon Province, a monument in memory of the Netherlands' participation in the war was unveiled. Also dedicated on this day was a statue of Lieutenant Colonel M. Den Oden, the first commander of the Dutch battalion that came to Korea during the war. On hand to witness the occasion was Madame E. Boeskamp, widow of the late Dutch officer. Colonel Oden was the first Allied commanding officer to be killed in action in February 1951. Mrs. Boeskamp came to visit Korea with Dutch veterans who fought on the Korean front in the early 1950s. They visited the hill where Colonel Oden fought and offered a moment of prayer in the newly built village church. Colonel Oden, seriously wounded in the battle against Chinese Communist forces, died during a firefight operation. Here in the northern outskirts of Tongdushan, Gyeonggi Province, a war monument dedicated to Belgium and Luxembourg participation in the war was unveiled, attended by retired Lieutenant General Albert Cray of Belgium and veterans from the two countries. Here, General Cray emphasized the friendly ties existing between Korea and these countries, remarking that the Belgian government and people would stand up for the Republic of Korea if and when the North Korean communists invade the South again. A monument honoring participation in the war by the Colombian Army stands beside the Seoul Incheon Highway. During the war, the Colombian Army and Navy contingents dispatched to Korea won fame as units that would never withdraw on the battlefield. The Colombian naval vessel Gloria that docked at the pier in Busan during a goodwill visit to Korea in 1975 brought some war veterans on board. The occasion contributed to the strengthening of ties between Colombia and Korea. The monument dedicated to the Philippine Army stands by the unification road that links Seoul with Panmunjom. Korean War veterans from the Philippines reminisced over the old days while visiting the sites of battles. They seem to be moved by the old battlegrounds that the Korean people have preserved so well as object lessons, warning future generations of the horrors of war and the need for strong national defense to avoid it. Among the Thais who revisited Korea were retired General Dongchem Sakabanki, a former deputy battalion commander, and 23 nurses with the Thai Army during the Korean War. They visited the war monument built in memory of the Thai soldiers at Woonchon, Gyeonggi Province, and old battle sites. The veterans then inspected a statue of General Douglas MacArthur at Incheon. Standing before the statue, they probably recall the famous Incheon landing launched by the United Nations forces under the command of the general. Here they perhaps remember the bygone days when the city was totally devastated. The The Korean War participants seemed to be pleased to see the well-developed port of Incheon with all its modern harbor facilities. Viewing the bustling loading and unloading operations at the busy port, they perhaps felt that their sacrifices during the war had not been in vain. Chuncheon, situated beside a beautiful lake, the provincial capital of Gangwon Province. A group of Korean War veterans visited the reconstructed city of Chuncheon and paid homage to the monument erected in memory of Ethiopia's participation in the war. Here they viewed the impressive dams newly built on the Han River. They also visited Kapyong in the province of Gyeonggi and offered a moment of prayer to the heroic war dead of Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Especially two winners of Congressional Medals of Honor, Messrs. Benjamin F. Wilson of Washington and Rodolfo Hernandez of California, toured battle sites in the Hwacheon district amidst a warm welcome extended to them by Koreans in the area. They had been well known to the Hwacheon people for their bravery and gallantry during fierce battles in the area during the war. Retired U.S. Marine Corps General and Mrs. Raymond G. Davis also revisited the old battlefields. General Davis, now a 60-year-old veteran, led the 1st Battalion of the U.S. Marine Corps in the Incheon landing and Seoul recapture during the Korean War. The visiting Korean War veterans crossed the Imjin River and headed toward Panmunjom. Panmunjom, the site of the Military Armistice Commission meetings between representatives of the United Nations forces and the North Korean communists. Here they saw firsthand that the North Koreans were still plotting to communize the whole of the Korean peninsula through an armed invasion against the South, and witnessed one such concrete proof, the infiltration tunnels that the Reds dug to point south of the military demarcation line which had been discovered by South Korean forces. They saw the bridge of no return over which UN war prisoners held captive in the North finally crossed to return to freedom when prisoners were exchanged at the time of the armistice. Winding up a tour of battle sites, the veterans visited the Integrated Display Center commemorating 30 years of national liberation at Yeouido Islet in the Han River. They seemed to be especially impressed by the display on the Korean War, in addition to those on Korean history and culture. They were also interested in the various displays showing Korea's progress and development since the war. They they now visited the industrial export estate on the outskirts of Seoul. They were particularly attracted by the skillful and delicate hands of girls working in an electronic factory. They also enjoyed a sightseeing tour to old palaces located right in the heart of the city. They learned something of the country's traditions and culture through viewing art treasures displayed at the National Museum. They also toured the folk village located south of Seoul. Here, Mr. Darrell G. Roop, a blind U.S. veteran, recalled the old Korean War days, tasting once again Korean farmers' rice wine. The sightseeing tour was over, and now the heroes visited President Park Chung-hee at Cheongwa-dae, the presidential residence. When the president, accompanied by his daughter, Kun-hye, met with Mr. and Mrs. Roop, a solemn atmosphere prevailed for a brief while. President Park then wished health and happiness to all visiting veterans, and further said that the Korean people were working and trying hard to defend the land in order that their sacrifices should not be in vain. Then they attended a dinner party hosted by the Korean National Tourism Corporation at Walker Hill Hotel. They shared a convivial occasion with their Korean counterparts and friends at Korea House, upon invitation by the Korean Veterans Association. Meanwhile, 6 mothers of the American war dead personally reviewed troops marching in their honor at the United Nations Command and the Korean Military Academy. Prior to departure, all the guests were invited to a commemorative ceremony for Korea's Armed Forces Day on October 1st, 1975. Witnessing the high-spirited Korean Army passing in review, they must have felt that all the sacrifices by the soldiers of the United Nations forces had not been in vain. They learned that the people of today's Korea are armed with the spirit of independent self-defense, ready to crush any invasion. They left Korea hoping that the Korean people, their old friends in the Far East, would continue to prosper and attain their ultimate goal, peaceful territorial reunification, as soon as possible.